Hi there, everyone. My name is Xose Lumor. I'm the Manager, Advocacy and Professional Ethics here at CIMA. Thank you for joining us for our Global Ethics Day 2025 CIMA Ethics Q&A. We reached out to CIMA members, registered students, members of the public for any questions that they may have in relation to ethics, professional standards, and professional conduct. We received a wide range of responses, and so those questions are going to be put to a panel of guests. That includes myself and partner at Level Law, Alastair Campbell. He's a dispute specialist with a wide range of experience in professional disciplinary matters, sports law, and arbitration. Our host for today, Eleonora Guarini, who's part of CIMA's Professional Standards and Conduct team. She has a wide range of experience relating to professional standards, ethics, and AML. With that being said, thank you so much for joining us. This is our Global Ethics Day 2025 CIMA Ethics Q&A. Let's go.
Hi, everyone. I am Eleonora, and I will be putting some questions to our guests today, Alastair Campbell and Xose Lumor. How are you guys today?
Good, thank you.
Good, good. Are you ready to go with this round of questions?
Yep, ready.
Yeah, let's do it.
First question is for Xose, and it is from Greg via email. What is ethics, and why should anyone care? Is it just a corporate buzzword? Does it mean anything really when living and working in the real world?
I think often it can feel like institutions, both public and private, can treat ethics as meaningless. So the cynical amongst us can have a hard time taking the conversation around it seriously. But I think it's important to be clear what we are talking about when we talk about ethics. This isn't purely just a case of thinking about right and wrong. When we talk about ethics, we're talking about a system of accepted beliefs that inform a person's behavior. So really, we want to understand the distinction between right and wrong, but more in relation to the thought process we use to determine what to do in any given situation concerning those rights and wrongs. And at the core of decision making, we as people generally have to make those decisions every day. Um, for professionals, ethics has numerous ways that it's important. For starters, trust is a currency. It's hard to earn, easy to lose. And ultimately, all of our professions run on trust. You need to trust your doctor to diagnose you. You need to trust your lawyer to defend you. And you need to be able to trust your accountant to look after your money or protect your business. And so if you lose trust, then the very foundations of our professions crumble. So it's definitely not just a corporate buzzword. It very much is of incredible importance in the real world. Yeah, I'd probably say ultimately it's there to help us decide what to do when we're faced with those problems when it comes to right or wrong. And we're all people, right? Who doesn't have problems?
Thank you very much. I do have another question from Albert on X, and this is again for Xose. So, with too much uncertainty due to geopolitics and potential trade wars, ethics can never be under any more pressure. How do we protect our reputation and our institutions?
Ooh. So I spoke about trust before, and for professionals, I think trust and reputation are inextricably linked. Um, for example, you will develop a reputation based on the behaviors you most commonly exhibit. If you go to meet friends for meals or for drinks, if you're the person that's always late, you'll develop that reputation for being late, and that's what people will expect. So, they might tell you to meet at 12:30 when really you're supposed to be meeting at 1 because they know you're going to be late. Now, this is important because I feel as though we may be in a time globally where there's a trend of minimizing the importance of ethical behavior, or where the barriers protecting us from unethical behavior may be being eroded, or at least that might be the perception. So there may be those of you out there who are seeing what you believe to be unethical behavior, and you may even be seeing people profit from that. And you're human, right? So it's understandable if you're thinking to yourself, well, if they can, why can't I? I say all of this to say that really, to protect our reputations, to protect our institutions, we have to think about the behavior that we most commonly exhibit. So it starts with us. For us as individuals, we have to internalize, embody, and then implement the behaviors that we want to see, the desired behaviors that we want of our institutions and of our organizations that we're a part of. By doing that and by embodying that, we can also think of appropriate ways to encourage that in others. And by being that example, when we then encourage that in others, that's taken far more seriously than it otherwise would. And ultimately, by embodying those ethics, we can create ethical cultures. And within those ethical cultures, we can cultivate others and their ethical thinking. So, what I'd probably say is, as much as it's a complicated answer, the simple version is it starts with us.
Thank you so much. I do have a question for Alistair now. This is from Kirsten via email, and she asked, given that CIMA members work across many countries and cultures, how should they deal with situations where local business norms conflict with international ethics standards?
I think the thing about an organization like CIMA is that one of its aims is to raise standards across the whole profession and ensure that the public in general can trust in the profession of management accountants. There's that word again, trust. Um, and that's not just raising technical or qualitative standards, but ethical standards as well. And there are many examples of things that are culturally acceptable in a business environment to me that may not be culturally acceptable in a business environment elsewhere. I'm wearing a t-shirt today, and so dress code might be an example of something which on which there are differing local and customary views, but it's not something that conflicts with ethical standards. I do think there are certain cultural and customary practices which are acceptable in some cultures that can conflict with CIMA's code of ethics. I'd give an example of perhaps facilitation payments, greasing the wheels, as it were, in some cultures is acceptable part of business culture. But I think that would be something that is not compatible with CIMA principles and the fundamental principles of the code of ethics, like integrity and avoiding conflicts of interests. And in those circumstances, I would come back to that notion of trust and CIMA's objectives of raising standards and maintaining trust in profession, and urge CIMA members to treat the code of ethics and those principles as a red line not to be crossed, as a minimum standard internationally.
Thank you very much, Alistair. I have another question for you. This time is from Roger. What's more effective in promoting ethical behavior, stronger education in ethics or stricter disciplinary enforcement?
Um, when it comes to ethics, I'm a strong believer in prevention being better than cure. Disciplinary enforcement is a last resort and should only be necessary really when there's been a failure or a falling short on the part of a member. And I'd rather those failures never happen in the first place. I'd rather that there's a world that existed in which we didn't see disciplinary enforcement because the ethical standards weren't breached. So the short answer, I would say, is stronger education in ethics and the disciplinary procedure and enforcement as a last resort.
Thank you very much. We're gonna go to Xose again. This is from Shiem via email. What role does organizational culture play in encouraging or discouraging ethical behavior?
I'd probably say organizational culture couldn't be more vital in shaping ethical behavior. I've heard it said somewhere that you can tell a lot about a culture by the worst behaviors tolerated and normalized. There's lots of research around behavioral science that shows unethical behavior often happens where people reflect the environment around them. So if you see executive staff and management behaving in a way they shouldn't, often the rest of the staff follow suit, or at least it's more likely to happen in any case. You often see in sports teams, you might have a manager or a coach who has non-negotiables. But if one player or athlete is able to avoid the consequences of that, everybody else thinks, well, why should I have to do it if they don't? So there's that. But conversely, if you have a culture that rewards integrity or encourages good faith dialogue that is open, it's easier to cultivate an organization where the desired behaviors thrive. So, really, if you want an ethical culture and you want buy-in for that, you need to sell it to people, and probably in a way that's not too dissimilar to selling a product to customers. So it needs to have a very clear message that's easily digestible. It resonates with people, and for it to resonate, organizations should really treat people as people. Think about what people need to feel and what they need to internalize in order to exhibit those desired behaviors, and then be accountable. People have eyes, people have ears. It's very obvious when an organization says one thing, but then quite clearly does another. So people will know if it's just talk or whether um, people really sort of live by the values that they say they do. And probably last thing I'd probably say is in terms of how important organizational culture can play in encouraging ethical behavior. It's important to remember that it's the little things that make up life. So it's not just about the big gestures. It's also about the small choices and the little details in the way you work and the way you operate day to day. Those little details matter because it's those small choices and those small actions that we perceive and shape the view of our environment around us.
Thank you so much. We're gonna go back to Alastair, and this is a two-part question from Cameron, who asked, first of all, what guidance would you give to a CIMA member who believes that they have discovered wrongdoing in their organization but fears retaliation? And the second part is, what would you say to a company who believes they have uncovered wrongdoing by a single staff member, but doesn't want the reporting of the wrongdoing to lead to a negative reputational damage for the company?
So taking the individual CIMA member first, it's obviously incredibly difficult to be a whistleblower. And I think anybody who takes that upon themselves is very brave. If you see wrongdoing in your organization, my personal view is, as someone who's seen how badly wrong these things can go when wrongdoing is not reported, my personal view is that members should speak up as soon as they can. I've never seen the situation improve when somebody has chosen to stay quiet. Probably more importantly and more directly for CIMA members, there's an obligation on CIMA members under the regulations to report promptly to the Institute anything that they reasonably believe may be misconduct on the part of another member or registered student. So there's actually a regulatory obligation on CIMA members to report back to the Institute. In terms of mechanics of guidance of how to go about it, I can understand why a member would be fearful of retaliation or ostracization from their place of employment or organization. I think as a good first step, you can talk to somebody senior within the organization, perhaps from outside of the team, where something you think wrongdoing has occurred, and to ask them for a second pair of eyes on what's happened. And then if you consider it appropriate, if you still believe that misconduct has occurred, then reporting to CIMA is not just an obligation, but it's something that really ensures that the higher standards are maintained. And CIMA will, of course, do everything in its power to ensure that there is no retaliation or the consequences to individuals are kept to a minimum. And there are various things that CIMA can do in the disciplinary process to help with that. Taking the second question in relation to a company, from a regulatory perspective, it's slightly different because CIMA obligations fall on individuals rather than companies. So that regulation, that obligation to report misconduct, doesn't apply to companies. That said, I don't think my view is any different in that misconduct that goes unreported never gets better. And the risk of reputational damage only grows for a company if misconduct goes unreported. If you think of the example of management accounts, a company relies on their management accounts. And if those accounts are inaccurate, or if there's any misconduct in relation to those accounts, the company's reliance on those accounts can be misplaced. And so if misconduct's not reported, company can continue to rely mistakenly on those management accounts. And I've seen on many occasions problems only growing through that kind of continued reliance. So again, I would suggest early reporting is the way forward.
Thank you so much. We're gonna move back to Jose with a question from Sarah. Um, and she's asking, what can professionals do to develop the ethical resilience necessary to deal with the pressure of working life?
Yeah, love this question. So, if we think about ethical resilience, I guess we can think about it like a muscle to train. You can build it up by exercising it regularly. Um, and when I say that, I suppose I'm talking about developing the capacity to maintain your fundamental principles and values, even when faced with complex challenges. Um, Often, stress can lead to people making rash decisions or uh, experiencing analysis paralysis. Uh, and even in those scenarios, the absence of a decision is still a decision of sorts. So, what I'd say is having a framework in place even before a problem exists is a great way of developing that ethical resilience, because you essentially can have a framework for dealing with dilemmas that you put in practice day after day as you deal with problems small and large. And over time, you can then develop, I guess, the thicker skin needed to be able to deal with those challenges. Here at CIMA, we have the CIMA Ethics checklist. It's a step-by-step process for dealing with ethical dilemmas in real time. Now, of course, every challenge is different. Some things, some steps will apply, others won't. But overall, having that kind of framework and building that into your practice can really make it easier when faced with challenges moving forward. And ultimately, as a professional, particularly one that we face with some of the challenges that CIMA members do face, um, it's important to develop that resiliency, because you are a barrier to bad faith actors who want to take advantage of your client or your employer organization, and other challenges you may face. So it's really important to do that, and it's really important not to wait till you have a problem to try and figure out what to do. To really try to build those practices in advance of, so you know the steps you might take should that problem arise, or rather when it eventually does.
Thank you so much, Jose. Alastair, this one is for you, and this is from Pat. And she's asking, is there any guidance you can give to CIMA members on how to deal with complaints from a client, especially when you feel like the client is being unreasonable?
That sounds quite familiar. I think being in the service industry means you're going to receive complaints. That's as true for CIMA members as it is for me as a lawyer, as it was for me when I worked in McDonald's as a teenager. And often in those situations, it's probably quite likely that you will feel that whoever is complaining is being unreasonable. And we all try our best, and sometimes people disagree with the outcomes that have been achieved, and will make a complaint. And I think what's important to remember is that people who are complaining often want to see that process has been followed. And so I think it's important for CIMA members to make sure that they have their own complaints procedure, and that that complaints procedure is abided by when they receive a complaint, so that the complaint can be dealt with in a way that is pre-planned, that is transparent, and that is fair to the client. And in my experience, a client will often calm down or be at least satisfied once they've been through a pre-documented procedure and that matters can be worked out between reasonable people. I think the worst thing you can do, although it's probably tempting, is to react defensively and tell the client exactly what you think of them and their complaint. I mean, that's just pouring fuel on the fire. And so if you can refer them to a pre-documented procedure, that helps both the client with structure, but helps you to follow that structure and react in a way that's going to diffuse the situation.
I do have a two-part question for Jose. This is from Nia, and the first question is, in your view, what new ethical challenges with AI create? And the second one is, if an AI system makes a decision that leads to unethical outcomes, who should be held accountable? The system, the user, or the management? Thank you.
So I'd say the sort of proliferation of AI is both exciting and, dare I say it, quietly disturbing. The upsides are exponential, but that also means the challenges are. For example, bias being baked into those systems, if they're systems that have an impact on people's real lives, and bias is baked in for people, you can work towards unlearning bias. But if it's in the systems, it's in there. The loss of human accountability, the temptation to treat outputs as gospel without rigorously checking them, all of these things are potential problems. And, there's also the atrophying of skills. So CIMA members study for years to develop the skills they have. Those skills are invaluable to employer organizations and clients alike. So the loss of those skills due to over-reliance on AI systems is something that naturally you'd want to avoid. But one of the bigger challenges for me is in how we think about the implementation of it. So I always think about that scene from Jurassic Park. I think it's Dr. Malcolm who says something along the lines of, you scientists were so preoccupied with whether you could, you never stopped to think whether you should. And I feel like that's a bit like how we look at using AI now. It's almost, when we get a technological advancement, it's very quick to say, how can we use it, as opposed to, do we even need to? So one thing I'd probably say is that people should think about whether they need to use it. What value does it add? Think about its origins, how it works, the outcomes. If you can't answer questions relating to it, you probably should ask yourself if you know enough to use it. And yeah, I'd probably say we just have to make sure we stay vigilant and stay critical and don't become over reliant in a way that's inappropriate. And as for the second question, if an AI system makes a decision that leads to an unethical outcome, who should be accountable? Well, AI may be autonomous in some ways, but I don't think it's yet accountable. So, Alastair, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you've ever had an AI software up in a defendant's seat having to explain why it gave a contract tender bid to its brother-in-law for below market rate, or why the petty cash till
Not
is
that I've
is
seen.
like. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that for now, it's still very much about us, the management that approves it, the users who use it. It's still very much for us, at least until the machines take over and can be accountable for themselves.
And can I just jump in here as well and give a bit of an example from my own profession, the legal profession? There's quite a lot of press at the moment about uh, cases going to court, and they reach the judge, and the judge goes to look at some of the citations that are in that case, some of the old cases that the lawyers have cited to support their arguments. And it's turned out that those cases don't exist. They're just fabrications. And on further examination, what's been shown to have happened is that the lawyers involved have used Gen AI, ChatGPT to help them draft their pleadings. And one of the known weaknesses of Gen AI is that it hallucinates. And so in these cases that have gone all the way to court and got before a judge, the lawyers have relied on AI to help them with their arguments, and the AI has come up with cases that don't exist. And that can be a matter of professional misconduct for a lawyer, because we have duties not to mislead the court. And so I think that's a good example of the caution with which AI should be treated, and to always double and triple check its output, because we're all busy, and we're all time short, and ChatGPT is something that is very useful in some respects in giving us back more time. But unfortunately for the lawyers involved who have relied on it, they now have a misconduct question to answer before their regulators. And so I think that's, as I say, a good example of the caution that's needed, and an example of the individual being held accountable for the output of AI.
Well said. Well said. Well said.
Thank you very much, both of you. I have a question for Alastair now. This is from Femi. And the question is, what lessons can members learn from real life disciplinary cases to avoid falling into similar pitfalls?
I have been the presenting officer on probably more than 50 senior cases now, and I've seen a wide range of types of misconduct. Some cases involve people who are just bad actors and whose misconduct needs to be stamped out. And I don't think that is the kind of person or kind of conduct that this question is directed to. There are some cases that I've worked on where I thought, gosh, there but for the grace of God, somebody's made a genuine mistake, but it's an ethical mistake, and one that has consequences, including a disciplinary procedure. And I feel a lot of sympathy for those people. And so I often try to think of how I can avoid those mistakes myself, because I'm in a regulated profession as well. And one of the cases that springs to mind immediately is of a very junior accountant who was asked to witness a signature on a mortgage document. And it's something that I get asked as a solicitor quite regularly, to sign something to say I've witnessed the signature. My next door neighbor did it the other day, in fact, when he was remortgaging his house, and he came over with the documents and asked me to witness the signature, but he'd already signed it. And because of the CIMA case that I did, I asked him to print it out again and literally watch him sign it, because the mortgage document in the CIMA case turned out to be fraudulent, and there were all sorts of horrible consequences just because this junior accountant had listened to his boss and signed and witnessed the signature when he didn't see the pen go onto the paper. And so that's an example of something that is, I think, quite regularly asked of people in regulated professions like accountants, and something where it can be tempting, particularly if it's your boss or somebody you're friendly with, to say, oh yeah, I trust this person, I'll just witness this document. And that is an ethical error. It's one that's easy to make. And so I think the advice I would give is to try and fight the good fight, and put to one side the social awkwardness or the professional awkwardness that might come with, say, I need to see you sign that document, or whatever the example might be of some minor piece of some minor ethical question. And really, as I say, fight the good fight, because you never know when your trust might be misplaced. You never know what consequences can flow from the tiniest of actions. And that's why the Code of Ethics exists. And that's why, going back to my first answer, CIMA holds its members to high standards and seeks to promote and raise standards globally, because it's all about trust in those regulated professions.
Thank you very much. We have one last question, and this one is for Xose, and this is from Adam, who's asking, many organizations have codes of ethics. What makes these effective or ineffective in practice?
Yeah, so codes of ethics can obviously come in many different forms, The CIMA Code of Ethics, for example, is a principles-based code as opposed to a rules-based code. So one of the benefits of that is that it's particularly effective at not only setting out requirements for CIMA members and registered students, but also providing application guidance for how to comply with the requirements within it. So it's not just about do's and don'ts, but it's also about helping to teach and guide professionals as they navigate the reality of their professional practice. And I spoke earlier about ethical resilience, reading, understanding, and again, baking into your practice the use of some of these applications and guidance, some of these best practices considerations can really help elevate a professional's practice. So in terms of their effectiveness, having a code that's well drafted and with an intuitive format, like the CIMA Code of Ethics does, if I say so myself, that can make them really effective. However, what really makes them work is the ability for professionals to be able to embed them into their daily routines, whether that's just in their day-to-day practice through training or even open discussions with colleagues. What can make them ineffective is the failure to make them practical for a professional's working life. There's no point in an organization, for example, having a code of ethics when they publicly or even quietly reward behavior that directly contradicts it. So, people will, as we've said, reflect the behavior of the environments around them. So it's really important that the elements of a code of ethics, if we really want them to be effective, they need to be, words that are livable. So they don't just live on the page, but people are able to live them out in real life.
That's all, and these are all our questions. Thank you very much, Alastair and Xose, for answering these questions, and thank you very much to everyone who wrote in. We hope you found these helpful, and until next time, bye.
Well, that was it, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you found that really, really useful. A lot of interesting information and insights, if I do say so myself. So thank you to Alastair for his time. Thank you to Eleonora, and thank you to everyone who wrote in with any questions. They were incredible. We had so many. Apologies we couldn't get to them all. Now, if you have any questions about the episode or about ethics generally at CIMA, then please feel free to get in contact with us. You can give us a call on 0203 814 2303. That's 0203 814 2303. Or you can send us an email at cima.ethics@aicpa-cima.com. That's cima.ethics@aicpa-cima.com. Equally, if you want more information about ethics at CIMA, you can visit our CIMA Ethics web pages. The web address you can see below. Again, thank you everyone very much for joining us. Now, of course, ethics is an area that is always evolving, always changing. There's so much happening. There's ethics and AI. There's more ethics and technology work that's being done, sustainability, and more. So please do check back in with us. Stay in contact. Everyone, have an amazing time, and we'll see you soon. Take care.